Just getting my stuff together.
Is it going?
Tell me there was 40 seconds left.
Oh.
What just happened?
So I'm sure we're all well researched for this.
So
I'm
prepared.
somewhat researched.
I mean, I've been researching my whole life. What's happened? How does this go back on?
It slides pretty easily on there now.
It doesn't appear to be sliding pretty. Oh, there we go.
You gonna do the intro?
Hello and welcome to Cinema Smackdown here on CPLS 1590 AM. My name is Tess, and today we're going to be talking about sequels, more precisely, sequels nobody needed or wanted, which is a very common topic of conversation amongst myself, because there are many unnecessary sequels going around out there these days. Seems like people have run out of the ability to come up with new ideas. So, Michael, did you want to intro this topic a little bit?
Well, the pitch for this episode, am I on the air? I can't hear me.
You are indeed on the air.
The pitch for this episode was unnecessary sequels. Whoa.
Sorry, that's not it.
Let's just cut in another station. It works for me. Unnecessary sequels. Films when, while you're watching them, you actually realize this was entirely made for money. This story did not need to be continued in any way, shape, or form. Everyone in it looks uncomfortable. That sort of thing. The unnecessary sequel has become kind of a staple in the film world. This summer saw, I wouldn't call the movies I'm about to mention unnecessary, but there was an onslaught of franchise sequels this year, like a fifth Jurassic Park. It was a fifth Jurassic Park movie. I don't know. What number are we at?
I've lost count.
I think
Oh, it is
fifth.
five. It is five.
Yeah.
Yeah, which just sort of drags a little bit more story of...
They fooled us by changing park to world. So clever.
Yeah, well, the next movie will be interesting, and I want to see what they do with the next title, considering the I won't mention the spoiler ending of the new one, but the title could be very different next time. And there was one in particular that struck me of the 38 sequels released this summer was The Incredibles 2, which comes 16 years after the first film, something along those lines.
14, I think.
Is an oddly flat film. It did get a lot of love, but when I saw it, I was struck by how the follow-up didn't have much juice. It's a pretty calm, not very energized story, and they just sort of seem to be desperately clawing to find something for the characters to do rather than have something to propel them into another...
Yeah, well, they spent 14 years percolating this fantastic idea, and it turns out it was kind of a direct-to-video sequel almost. Yeah.
Well, when I saw the movie, I actually saw it with Shane, and he had the most perfect comment when we came out of the film. He didn't think it was a bad movie, but what he said to me was, this felt more like an Incredibles 5, not a 2, not a 14-year long-awaited follow-up. It felt like, well, we've had so many of these, it's okay to do a kind of regular one.
Do one that's just okay.
Yeah, and that's what it is. It's just okay, which is a strange motivation to do one. Although some reviews claim it is the greatest thing ever, so I guess it just depends on your point of view in this case.
It's better than Cars 2.
I'll never know. The one thing I can say about Cars is that I stopped watching the first one about 2/3 of the way through and could never go back to that super creepy world.
So you never found out what happened?
Well, no, I already knew what happened. Anyone who's seen Cars knows that Cars is actually an offside sequel to the Terminator franchise. This is what happens when the Cyberdyne Terminators win. They eradicate all the humans, and then we have sentient cars driving around. It really does feel like that world.
I was hoping it was a direct sequel to Maximum Overdrive.
Well, that
complete with
works too.
Stephen King cameo.
Perfect. Also, on the same note, I was going to save this one for later, but I'll just jump to it right away. When we talk about unnecessary sequels, sometimes a sequel comes from, well, we just realized we could just wring a little more money out of this. And sometimes a sequel comes from a genuine place if we want to keep exploring this story, or the general public will just accept it if we pretend we're trying to do this. But a lot of films end. They end really hard. They're finished. They feel very complete. There's no need to come back to this. And a film, one of the most perfect examples of a movie in which we do not need to come back or say another word about this, is a movie called The Terminator from 1984 with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Explain. Is this an art house thing? I don't. I must have missed that
I
one.
don't know if our audience has heard of this.
Yeah.
This might be a little too obscure.
Well, the thing is, we're so far into the 27 franchised films of this, and we're going for another one next year. People tend to forget the first movie is a closed time travel loop, like 12 Monkeys. It begins somewhere, it ends somewhere, and the ending immediately comes back
Did you
around.
see 13 Monkeys?
There we go.
12 Monkeys sequel, but reopens the loop and brings in,
Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
that was good.
I think 12 Monkeys morphs into the Oceans franchise, because they're the 13, 14,
That's
yeah.
right.
Oh, no, actually, the 13 was the last.
Now
Now
it's
I've
down to
totally
8.
forgotten. It's 11. Oceans 11 was the first one.
Mm-hmm.
That's how the numbers...
They've gone backwards now.
I know.
They couldn't find, 11 competent women.
The hubris of them to say the new one is the 8th one, and we'll build our way up to 10, because of course there will be 2 sequels to this. But the Terminator movie is a closed circle of a completed act. A robot is sent into the past to ensure that a person comes back to try to stop something, and the robot comes after him, but instead of changing anything, they ensure that the future happens exactly the way it was always supposed to. It becomes a perfect circle, which is a great and finished story. It is, much like the thing it's ripped off of, essentially a little Harlan Ellison short story from the 50s or 60s that James Cameron was famously sued by Harlan Ellison for plagiarism for this, by the way, and he lost that case. Ellison was paid handsomely. But when they came around and said, we're doing Terminator 2, I said, well, what are you going to do it about? And they said, well, the robots in the future, having sent a robot back to fix everything, immediately realized it wouldn't work and sent another one. Now, that's not possible, given the rules of your whole first movie. And essentially, if it didn't work, you would just cease to exist. That's how time travel is. But they're like, oh, we've had plenty of time to think over the fact that our original plan wasn't perfect, so we'll just keep going. And then every subsequent movie is, let's just send more people and robots back, because time travel is meaningless, even though it's the entire engine of this story. So that is one of my favorite examples of a sequel that shouldn't have happened, makes no sense, and is completely unnecessary.
And yet a beloved one.
Yeah, I mean, Terminator 2 is a very beloved movie, but, say that no one says the same about Terminator Genesis or Salvation.
You mean Genesis?
Yeah, that's, there you go.
We're probably forgetting 2 or 3 Terminator films in the mix there. There's just too many to keep track of.
And wasn't there probably a cartoon show at some point, and there's probably an anime version, possibly a teenage reboot that was done for the CW. Oh yeah, there was one of those. I was joking, and then I remembered there was actually a Terminator show called Sarah Connor.
Sarah Connor Chronicles.
The Sarah Connor Chronicles. Wow, it's funny when you're just spitballing terrible ideas and you realize it's been done. Shane, why don't you grace us with an unnecessary sequel topic?
Well, I need to talk about the elephant in the room because I'm going to hear about it if I don't mention everyone's least favorite sequel of all time. Except for me. I don't really care that this movie exists, but many people care passionately that Highlander 2 happened.
That's a very good one to mention.
Highlander, that's another wonderful little self-contained movie. It has a very definite ending.
Yeah, it has.
There could be only one, and at the end of the film, guess what? There's only one. No need to continue. And yet, someone decided we needed to pull a Highlander 2 out of somebody's ass. And it is a dismal sequel. I just find it completely easy to ignore that it even exists.
Well, change. It's a franchise that has rules, and they change all the rules in the sequel.
Right, and that just
suddenly
irritates the hell out of fans of the original Highlander.
I mean, suddenly they're feeding all the Highlanders after midnight. They're getting wet.
Honestly, I don't even remember what happens in Highlander 2. Although, aren't they aliens or something?
It is discovered that all of the rules from the previous movie are non-existent because it turns out they're aliens, and just more aliens come to Earth, which is astonishing. They also all have...
And guess what? Sean Connery's back from the dead for whatever reason.
And they all have flying skateboards.
Because we could book him. That's about it.
He was available.
Sean Connery said, I seem to remember this pretty famously, he said, well, they were shooting in, I'm going to say Spain for some of the movie, and he said, do you have any idea how good the food in Spain is? That was his entire reason for going.
I'm sure he probably, him and Michael Caine, they have that rule of, well, where's it shooting? Where is this piece of crap shooting? Would that make a nice holiday? Okay.
Is that why Alfred goes to Paris at the end of the third Batman movie?
No, but it is why the Jaws franchise ends up in the Barbados with Michael Caine, who missed getting his Oscar for Hannah and Her Sisters, to go be on that terrible, talk about worthless sequels. That's one of them.
But Michael Caine did get to see Mario Van Peebles get spit out of a Jaws after being swallowed by one.
Yeah, well, depending on what cut you see.
That's very true.
There's one cut where he dies, another cut where it's like, oh, he's a really popular character. We'll have the shark
pork him up.
arbitrarily regurgitate him. Which, I don't know, which makes a shark seem racist. I don't know. It's the only one and only black victim in all the Jaws films. It's like, nah, I'll pass.
Yeah, it's true. Even in Deep Blue Sea, I was going to say Cuba Gooding. No. LL Cool J gets a pass, too. I would have watched LL Cool J do any of Cuba Gooding Jr.'s roles, and I think I would have been happy.
I haven't seen any of them, but I'm sure some black people have to buy it in Sharknado.
I have no clue. No clue.
Somewhere in that franchise, there's got to be multi-ethnic victims.
Samuel L. Jackson dies in the one.
That's true.
Oh, that's true.
And he does die hard.
And multiple sharks find him to their liking because he's a shared meal.
That's very true. He is ripped to pieces by two sharks and removed from the story very suddenly.
Sadly, there's no sequel to that film.
Are we done with our thoughts on Highlander 2?
Oh, there's so many wonderful, terrible movies to mention, though.
You mean in the franchise?
No, I mean in worthless sequels.
Yes. Well, you brought up Jaws. Jaws is another one where I would angrily argue that at the end of the movie Jaws, you've said all you need to say about a shark wandering into human territory and eating a couple and angering everybody. Like, that is not... The sequel to Jaws, which I know you're fond of, it just doesn't add anything. It's like, hey, remember how much money this made? I bet if we just exactly recreate this with enough of the original cast, that people will not be too angry that we made it.
Yeah, see, I have a personal affection for a few films that are considered unnecessary sequels and are in the unenviable position of following a film that was an instant classic. And it was an uphill battle. There was nothing they were going to do to top or match the original film. And yet, taken as their own little thing, they're not bad. And I like Jaws 2 in the same way I like French Connection 2. Or one of my favorite obscure... They made another one of those. There's a film called More American Graffiti. I'm actually quite a fan of that film. It's a very different film than the original film. It does a lot of interesting, innovative things with narrative and structure. George Lucas didn't direct it, but he did produce it. And of course, being George Lucas, he decided, that didn't go so well. I completely disavow it. I was like, no, that's actually some of your best work.
Well, I completely agree with you, Shane, that The Exorcist 2, The Heretic is horribly, misunderstood film that really, really added something to the Exorcist franchise. So we're on the same page there. The demon Pazuzu, the thing with the psychiatrist. I don't even...
Pazuzu just didn't get enough screen time in the first one.
Weirdly racist scenes that take place in... overtly racist scenes that take place in Africa.
And there's nothing quite like having a 2-hour epic journey to remove a demon from a little girl and to really finalize the concept that we have saved her, it's done, and then make a sequel where yeah, it's back!
It's back. It's still there. It was never gone to be a...
Yeah, that's really offensive to your audience.
Yeah, I mean...
Just disregard what the original creator wanted, and what any of the audience got any satisfaction out of the story being finished. Nope, there's just more.
Yeah, that's a John Borman film, right?
Yep.
Yeah. It's one of those weird examples where a relatively high tier director gets grabbed and stuffed onto a sequel that no one asked for. I'm also thinking, because I mentioned French Connection 2, that's a follow-up to the William Friedkin film, but they got John Frankenheimer to do it, who in the 60s could do no wrong.
Do you mean 52 Pickups, John Frankenheimer? Do you mean Reindeer Games, John Frankenheimer?
Yeah, absolutely. Great. No, I was going to say, yeah, in the 1960s he could do no wrong, and then in the 70s his career just started to tank horribly.
Yeah, and his entire 80s output is horrid.
Yeah, although he did come back for, I don't think you're a fan, but I'm a fan of Ronin, and we're both a fan of Reindeer Games, especially the director's cut.
Yeah, Reindeer Games is a very maligned movie that is very entertaining if you like pulp comic book style film.
But you need to see the longer director's cut because that's the cut that makes you realize, oh, this is a dark comedy.
Yeah.
Ah, okay, now I get it.
Well, I always knew it was a dark comedy. They just underlined it a little bit more.
Yeah, well, by actually including the comedy parts.
The comedy portions of it.
Because he can never throw too many darts into Ben Affleck.
That's very true.
That's a known fact.
That is a very satisfying dart into Ben Affleck's chest scene.
We do have to take a little break here for some advertisement, and when we come back, we will talk some more about unnecessary sequels.
Alright. Is this 10 seconds, or...?
No, it'll be like a minute and a half.
It's a real sponsorship.
There's 2 apps to play. And
Sweet. I'm not bothered, I just wanted to know how much time we have. Yeah, I had Highlander 2 in here.
Yeah, no, it's kind of a essential one to mention.
I can talk about that movie for 15 minutes, but it's fine.
There's so much to cover.
It's actually a cut of that movie where they cut all the alien stuff out of it.
Oh, yeah. Well, was that a fan edit, or...?
No, Russell Mulcahy's director's cut has no edit stuff in it. No alien stuff in it. Yeah.
So it was a studio-imposed decision. How about their aliens?
I mean, that is one of the worst examples ever of, because I said so, we're just going to throw out everything that means anything in this and just add crazy shit. Like, I mean, Aliens is about the worst thing you could add. They're secretly a race of Easter bunnies. Would have been worse, but only marginally.
Oh, well, yeah. If you've seen that Scarlett Johansson film, Scots sound like a bunch of aliens anyway.
There was a line in BoJack Horseman from this season.
Mm-hmm.
Someone looks aghast, and a person looks at me and goes, you look like you just saw a ghost in the shell screening and realized what it would be like to be Scarlett Johansson's manager now. I was like, wow, that was impressive. That show goes. That show BoJack Horseman.
Yeah.
I liked season 1 a lot. I really liked season 2 or season 5.
Mm-hmm.
It's the greatest thing I've ever seen. It's all misery and brilliant writing, and I mean misery. Like, I can't believe they keep redoing this, considering how upset these characters are.
5 seconds.
How justified it is.
And we're back.
More sequels.
More sequels.
Thanks, Hollywood. Well, let's talk more about totally unnecessary sequels. One of my favorite unnecessary sequels to the nth degree is when you have a franchise. It dies a natural or unnatural death, and then 10 or 20 years later, we reboot the franchise, and then we make sequels from that. That's the greatest. So what I'm talking about in this case is a movie called Fright Night from 1985, which is a very solid teen vampire film, extremely well made, well thought out, and also a very closed story. There is nothing else to say at the end of that. They did manage to make a pretty unnecessary sequel to it in the 80s.
Because guess what? The vampire had a sister.
Yeah, very much in the Hans Gruber had a brother vein. The vampire had a sister, so they bring the characters back. That's a pretty unnecessary sequel.
And they never bother to tell the main character, by the way, remember that vampire we killed? This is his sister. That's why she's attacking us.
Oh,
that little bit of information never gets conveyed. It's
only conveyed to the audience?
Yeah, it's like the Roddy McDowell character learns this and doesn't tell the main guy.
Yeah.
I just sat there being irritated by that.
They came very, very close to making a third film in that franchise. The director of the original movie had nothing to do with the sequel. and then he was going to come back and make a third one when it was still going to be the original actor and Roddy McDowall.
So picking up the pieces a la J.J. Abrams.
And this was in the early 90s, and this is the amazing part. The film was being independently financed. The whole thing was coming together, and the independent financer was, I cannot remember this person's name, but I think it's, what is it, Jordan Belfleur or Belfoy? The guy who...
Belfort? The guy
Yes.
from The Wolf of Wall Street?
Yes, that's my
What?
point.
That
Oh,
He was
no.
literally,
Can't be true.
yeah, he was literally
God.
financing Fright Night 3 because he wanted to see another movie with Roddy McDowall and this character, and he had all the money in the world, so he just was
Oh, that's a
throwing into things.
And to be fair, he was really coked up at the time.
Well, I think he was on Quaaludes actually.
What's your unnecessary sequel?
Well, since you mentioned Jordan Belfort, I was going to say Wall Street Money Never Sleeps.
Oh,
Right,
okay, well,
right.
A sequel to Wall Street.
yeah, not a
was the-
sequel to Wolf of Wall Street,
No,
but whatever.
it's a similar character or whatever, but Wall Street, of course.
The film that said, oh, in the original we had Charlie Sheen, but he's a bit of a mess now. Who could we get to replace him? I know, Shia LaBeouf.
Someone who won't fall apart in public.
How many teeth did he have removed for that role?
No, but so Wall Street, the original, is a film
Pretty
that is
solid.
a very tight film.
Pretty solid.
It has the arc that it needed to have, and Michael Douglas is the kind of reprehensible Wall Street guy in that movie. And they were like, you know what we really need? Like a sequel that humanizes this Wall Street guy and brings in his daughter with her pregnancy. I don't even remember what that movie was about, to be honest.
It's
And-
about Oliver Stone cashing a check.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Yes.
And then Shia LaBeouf's character befriends giant robots, I believe.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
okay.
Befriends
Right,
giant
that's the one.
robots. One of the robots, the voice box doesn't work, so it has to speak only in like
In radio catchphrases.
radio catchphrases and stuff like that. It was a weird way for the very realistic film to go. So.
I do feel like most of what Michael Douglas says in that movie sounds like radio catchphrases. Greed is good. It is. Just getting back to the one I started with, I was talking about Fright Night unnecessary sequels. Now, while Fright Night 2 was a little unnecessary, they rebooted. Basically, they did a remake in 2011. They did a Fright Night remake, which almost beat for beat just copies the original movie without adding anything to it. It's kind of a flat remake. It has Anton Yelchin in it as the lead. It has David Tennant, who I really do like, playing a very odd version of the Roddy McDowall role, and it has Colin Farrell playing the most flat possible version of the vampire. It's a very mediocre attempt to tell the same story that was already perfect. Now, that isn't an unnecessary sequel. That's just a remake. But they made a sequel to that Fright Night, starring none of that cast.
I didn't notice.
Yes, they made a sequel to it. Now, here's the amazing thing. The sequel, brilliantly titled Fright Night 2, is a remake of the original Fright Night again.
They didn't call it Frighteninger Night?
Frightier?
Frighter Night? Frighter Night?
I like Frighter Night. So Fright Night 2 from 2014 or something along those lines has a new, completely unknown cast in the same character roles of a guy who sees a vampire move in next door and kill somebody, but it takes place in Europe while on vacation, and it is a female vampire, but it's a female vampire. The whole thing is just a soft remake of the exact same previous movie, which I think is the worst and simultaneously most genius way to do something. Just keep remaking the same story
I'd
endlessly.
like to fact check you here because it's actually called Fright Night 2 New Blood, so that really adds something.
Oh, it's new. Okay.
There we go.
Like new Coke.
Like New Coke, everyone's favorite thing.
It is very much the new Coke of Fright Night sequels. Shane, what have you got for us?
Well, I wanted to mention the phenomenon that you know you're in deep trouble with a sequel if it appends rather than a number words like another
Another
or
is
more
Yeah.
or two, T-O-O.
Oh, yeah. Or
So-
2, T-O,
so far-
like Dumb and Dumber 2.
yeah. That was a scary one. I think so far.
No, that was Dumb and Dumberer, wasn't it?
Dumb and Dumber. Was it not Dumb and Dumber 2?
Oh, no, there's a new one, yeah, the T.O. with...
T.O.
Yeah, there was the one in between without Jim Carrey.
Right,
and,
the
yeah.
one with two
Right.
legs.
Yeah, so
the most necessary sequel of all.
I forgot it was a trilogy, because you
Jim
had to
Carrey's
bring it
so
all
good.
together at the end,
You
yeah.
had to have your Phantom Menace prequel. But I think of all of the words you just listed, I think the word another is the most perfect for a worthless movie because it's almost a review of the film.
It really
Yeah.
is.
Oh, it's another one of
48
these.
hours.
Another stakeout.
It's just like we couldn't even come up with another word to add the stakeout. We give up. It's another. It's the pitch meeting. It's another
Let's just
stakeout.
do another stakeout.
But
Whatever.
that
That's the cocaine.
that does bring up also the phenomenon of, hey, let's make a sequel without key cast members.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so you mentioned Dumb and Dumberist, whatever. The middle one that does not have Jeff Daniels and Jim Carrey in it.
I think it's called Dumb and Dumber 2, both T.O.
Right,
No,
right. That's the third one.
That's
Yeah.
the third one.
That's the third one.
Yeah.
That's the legitimate sequel. No, it's called Dumb and Dumberer.
But there is also a Mask 2 without Jim Carrey.
Very true.
And
It's not called Dumb and Dumberer. It's called Dumb and Dumberer
When Harry Met Lloyd.
Yeah.
okay.
Even better.
There's also The Sting 2 without Paul Newman and Robert Redford.
Oh, right.
And probably the greatest, Blues Brothers 2000 without John Belushi, who had the good sense to die nearly 20 years earlier to avoid being in this film.
Isn't it also without Jim Belushi, or is he in there somewhere?
No, they got John Goodman. To
I know they got John
replace,
Goodman,
yeah.
but...
well, what was Jim Belushi doing that weekend? He was probably available.
A mountain of cocaine. The same thing he did this weekend.
Allegedly. He's still alive. Shh.
Anyway, Blues Brothers 2000 is a travesty. It is a very uncomfortably poor sequel that every single character in the movie looks upset they're in. That is one of those movies where you watch the actor stare into the camera longingly like, please let this be over. Please let this be over. It's, that movie opens with a scene of Dan Aykroyd's character learning that his brother has died in prison. And it's such a bummer. It's telling the audience, yeah, we really couldn't get him. He's dead. He's so dead. Although it's a lot creepier when they say someone has died when the actor is still alive. Like Indiana Jones 4, where Harrison Ford is looking at a picture of his father and literally remembered his not so recent death.
Yeah,
remember back when my dad died, way back when?
Connery's still around, but we couldn't book him for that one because we weren't shooting in a nice location.
Yeah, and then they mentioned Denholm Elliott, who actually had
Yeah,
passed
he had
away.
died, yeah.
It's just creepy when you're sitting in the audience going, I know he's not dead.
Well, hey, hang on to your hat for that season 2/season 1 of The Conners.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. Mind you, the crazy thing was everyone was screaming, I will just for a moment talk about a TV show. Everyone is like, how are they going to write her out of the show? What are they going to do? The literal last episode aired is an episode that touched on opioid abuse and showed her walk away with a stash of pills in her hand, showing that she has a problem. I don't think
And then she walked right in front of a car.
I don't think anything could have written itself more easily. That writer's room, what a horrible... how are we ever going to come up with something? Well, I don't know. Let's watch the last minute of the last episode we did. Oh, look, a solution.
A couple others to mention in the making the sequel without key cast members. We have Caddyshack 2, which...
It had the only cast member I cared about.
Yes, it did have Chevy Chase, because...
No, the gopher.
Oh, the gopher. Was it the same puppet, or was it like a sad, melted Yoda puppet like we got in Last Jedi?
I think they're both sad, melted Yoda puppets.
Okay.
I mean, do you remember the original Caddyshack? It's not a realistic gopher. It's a sock puppet.
No, it's a Muppet, yeah.
At best.
But, no Bill Murray for that, but
And no Rodney Dangerfield. You remember who they replaced him with?
Jackie Mason,
That's
right?
correct.
Yeah.
That's a bit rough.
Yeah, well, Ruff is replacing Bill Murray with Dan Aykroyd.
Yeah.
Who shows such great judgment making films like Blues Brothers 2000.
Yeah, but when it comes to good judgment and Dan Aykroyd, He's made a lot of strange movies. He did appear in the reboot of Ghostbusters, so that tells you.
Well, they all did.
But not Harold Ramis. He had the good sense to die. But I mean, this isn't a sequel, but Dan Aykroyd didn't just appear in this movie. He wrote and directed a film called Nothing But Trouble. And once you've seen that movie,
you'll know all you need to know about Dan Aykroyd.
You'll know all you'll need to know about Dan Aykroyd. He is I mean, if you see an interview with him where he talks about ghosts or demons or something, you really know he's crazy. But if 25 years ago you had seen Nothing But Trouble, you would have known then.
But can we plug his vodka again? Cool bottle.
It is delicious.
Oh dear.
And one more I have to mention too. One of the strangest choices I think that has ever been made. Let's make Speed 2 without Keanu Reeves.
Well, it's not a strange choice. They wanted money.
Well, they wanted... Yeah, but usually you need the action star to continue in the action movie.
Someone who kind of looks like him. Shane, what more do you
Sandra
want
Bullock?
The other guy.
Oh, the other guy.
To be fair, the co-star of that movie is Jason Patric, who literally looks angry he was cast in the film for the entire movie, and in interviews pretty much said he was angry to have been forced to take that role because he had no choice in his career at that point.
Damn you for paying me piles of money to do this.
Yeah. You are listening to CJLO 1690. That's a little station identification.
That is true. We are on CJLO 1690.
I thought we would hit that for fun. Oh, that's true. We are on AM. Mm-hmm. The classy of band.
We're not on 1690 FM, guys.
Then we'd have to do easy listening music, probably. Something along those lines.
So, you got something?
I got dozens more.
Yeah,
I mean, it's an endless list. Would you have one, Tess?
I have one that I think is perhaps somewhat controversial. Not controversial that it was unnecessary, but controversial that any of it was necessary to begin with. But I will argue that it was. Which is Sex and the City 2. And I know what you're going to say. Was any Sex and the City movie...
You know what I'm going to say?
Was any Sex and the City movie ever necessary? And maybe not necessary, but I do think that there was a place for a Sex and the City film after the show finished. You may think what you will about the show, but it was a groundbreaking show at the time. In showing explicit sexual relationships for women, and the show revolved a lot around female friendships than it did around the men in their lives, although it did somewhat revolve around the men in their lives. And it ended pretty poorly. People were unhappy with the way the show ended, and there was room there for a follow-up, a film. People are huge fans of the show. I think it was reasonable for a film to come out after the end of the show. The film was pretty bad. The Sex and the City 2 movie is only a shameless cash grab, in the sense that they literally made this movie because the Abu Dhabi Tourism Board was like, we'll give you a bunch of money if you make a movie where Abu Dhabi seems like a very luxurious travel destination for women, rather than being,
Right. The same way Bahrain pays CNN to do puff pieces about it. Yeah.
So, legitimately, Sex and the City 2 film, no reason for it to exist whatsoever, other than the fact that they could shoot in Abu Dhabi for no money, and were paid a lot of money to film there.
And to sound like a vacation spot.
And make it sound like a vacation spot, and somewhere fun to hang out. It's kind of racist, it's kind of terrible, I mean, very terrible. I don't think that there are many films that were more unnecessary than Sex and the City 2.
And Kim Cattrall and Sarah Jessica Parker weren't trying to kill each other just yet.
I would pay good money to see a Sex and the City movie now with elements of real world added, so you would have that animosity between the two of them.
Yeah, it would kind of be like Sex and the City 3, single white female.
Well, then you also have to add in Cynthia Nixon's failed political campaign to it. Like, all of these details could come together into, I think, a pretty interesting movie, especially just the knock-down, drag-out catfight element between the other two women. I think I would pay to see that one at this point. Just the thought of the two of them in a room together sounds awesome to me. They are so mad at each other.
Yeah.
How dare you have been a pivotal piece of the thing that made me this wealthy? I will have my tiny husband beat you up.
When you're that wealthy, Michael, you have to make your life interesting somehow. Okay.
I think they're doing a great job. I'm going to jump over to a totally different movie sequel that I think is worth mentioning as completely unnecessary. There was I'm going to use the word delightful, probably most people would find this movie very dismissible. There was a movie from the late 80s called Weekend at Bernie's, which is a cute little film. It's about two guys who go to their boss's resort country house for the weekend, arrive to find that he's been murdered. They don't even realize this at first, that he's dead, and then realize that someone is still after them, and the only thing that they can do is make it appear as though he's still alive to keep from being assassinated. So they carry his corpse around, buddying around with him for the entire movie.
It's a zany yet ultra-light black comedy.
Yeah, it is kind of a charming film, but there's a resolution at the end. Everything that is conspiring against the heroes is resolved by the end of that movie. Meanwhile, it made money. So somehow there had to be a Weekend at Bernie's 2. Weekend at Bernie's 2.
Weekend at Bernie's 2. Does something smell funny?
Yeah, I mean, he's a corpse. There's only so far you can go with this. There's a Weekend at Bernie's 2 that opens moments after Weekend at Bernie's ends. So they got around the he's starting to stink element.
And then they added a supernatural element
that's
to it.
That's where I'm going, is they have to have new problems for the characters, and one of those problems involves cursing Bernie's corpse with a spell that makes him dance whenever music is playing. So you literally get to watch this poor actor who had to play a slumped over ragdoll for an entire film to turn into a dance machine.
He had about 20 good minutes in the first film, and then he's been playing a stiff ever since.
Unbelievable. Yeah, the entire second movie is a wide-eyed, what were they thinking movie. And I mean, it's awful, but it's worth seeing on that basis of, I cannot believe this exists. I would have paid really good money to see them wring a third film out of the franchise, which unfortunately never happened. It would be fun to see it now, what with the two male leads being well into middle age, and I believe Bernie is still alive. Maybe.
Yeah, but they would have to get a skeleton to play his part.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
That would be awesome. I would totally see that.
Even if it was just a skull. That's a great cold open. There's a knock at the door. They open the door. There's a brown cardboard box in the stick. He opens it. It's a skull, and he turns to his friend who he's still living with, and it's just, oh my God, it's Bernie.
And there's a new curse on it, so every time it gets slightly cold out, it turns into chattering teeth.
This just writes itself. Andrew McCarthy, you should call us.
Well, it is one of those sequels that sort of defies, rather than just shamelessly remaking the first film, it tries to do something new and ends up defying its own concept.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of those as well. And I would have to mention Staying Alive, the sequel to Saturday Night Fever.
That movie has the greatest cameo in the history of movies.
I have not seen it, and you're going to tell me all about his cameo.
Go on.
But the thing about this film is, who wants to see that character try to make it as a Broadway stage dancer in the 80s?
Yeah.
So even the style is completely different and garishly horrible in a different way than it was in Saturday Night Fever. But it also features music. Well, it was directed by Sylvester Stallone, so it has music by Frank Stallone, and it's like that. Yeah, and
Let's not underplay the Bee Gees. It's the love of Bee Gees for the franchise.
So what's a cameo in that one?
Oh well, now that you've just reminded me, there are two cameos in that movie. The first is minor, a very very early appearance in the first instrumental scene of the film, where the dance choreographer at the beginning of the movie is Kirkwood Smith, who a couple of years later would go on to be the villain in RoboCop, one of the most menacing screen performances of all time, is playing...
/ Suburban Dads.
Is playing a dance choreographer looking extremely... he's pretty much wearing a headband and leg warmers in that scene.
Isn't everybody in that film?
Yeah.
That's the only image I have of that film.
But no, when it comes to gratuitous, insane, brilliant cameos, Staying Alive is the #1 film of all time. The movie opens with John Travolta, and we have to establish who he used to be and who he is and what his goals are. A good 10-15 minute segment of just showing, hey, he's doing okay, he's got problems, but he's a cool guy and we're all rooting for him. Just enough to set that up. And then there's a sequence where he's walking down a street. We've pretty much, it's John Travolta, we get it now. And there's just this little moment, not plot related. He's walking down the street, music's playing, and as he's walking along the sidewalk, walking towards him is Sylvester Stallone wearing a giant fur coat, and I believe a pimp hat. And they pause, look at each other, grudgingly sort of give each other the nod like, you're goddamn right, we're in the greatest movie ever made. And then pass each other. That's the greatest cameo.
We both got famous around the same time.
That's about right. Worth seeing just for that moment. My recollection is the entire rest of the movie, nothing happens.
Another one that comes up, and you're going to want to defend this film because I think you're a fan.
Here we go.
One of those. Why does a sequel exist? It doesn't seem to be really related to the original, and yet it is. It's sort of an extended epilogue. I'm talking about The Two Jakes, the sequel to Chinatown.
Yeah, I'm not going to defend that very hard.
I've heard you defend it though.
It's well directed by Jack Nicholson, but it is a very unnecessary sequel. To the point where a completely unrelated story, the movie is just a new plot, ultimately becomes entirely based on the plot of the first film by the end. It's like, hey, we're researching, I'm a detective, I'm investigating this entirely new crime with all new people. And, oh, it's everybody from the first movie tied into this, isn't it? And it's all those characters. Oh, look, cameos by people. By the end, it's so weighed down.
There are the occasional film that ends up being an epilogue to a previous, much more successful film, even within the midst of a franchise. And so since this came up, I have to mention the James Bond film, Quantum of Solace. The shortest James Bond film ever made, following what had been the longest Bond film ever made, Casino Royale, and it literally is an epilogue.
Yeah. That happens a lot. A lot of sequels are epilogues. I mean, to be fair, what Lost World Jurassic Park is just an epilogue, isn't it? To Jurassic Park.
I feel that way more about the book. Yeah. Whereas the sequel film takes a lot of material that was in the original book that they didn't get to use and throws that in as well. So, I mean, it's a rubbish film, but. By that point, I just wanted to see a film with cool-looking dinosaurs eating people, and I sure got that.
Another personal, aggravating sequel, never should have happened movie, only because they made a bad one, I guess, is, I don't know, about eight years ago, there was a Tom Cruise movie called Jack Reacher, which I had zero expectations for, seeing as it's from kind of this... I don't know, indestructible book franchise of trashy action. They're fun to read, but they're arguably terrible novels.
Popcorn.
But, yeah, exactly. They're very readable, but they're junk. And the movie that they made of it, the original Jack Reacher film, it's kind of a sublime, moody, 1970s style action thriller that is almost from beginning to end it's such good intentional filmmaking. It's so well directed, it's so well written, it transcends what it could have been. It's like a lovely, lovely little movie. It's almost a perfect crime film. And it took them about 6 years to make a sequel in which they made the most standard. It's called Jack Reacher Never Go Back. The most standard, average, almost straight to video action film. Not one good line of dialogue. No plot that's worth remembering. It was exactly the film I expected from the first one.
And it has one of those great prophecy titles because no one will ever go back to the theater to see another Jack Reacher film.
Exactly. So that was a pretty unnecessary sequel. Tess, have you got any more?
Yeah, I absolutely do.
Oh, let's hear one of yours.
This is one that not only was unnecessary, but actually makes the original film worse, by its existence. And that is The Matrix Revolutions.
Oh, yeah.
So The Matrix, the original Matrix film, I loved when I first saw it when I was, however old I was, 12 or 13 when it came out. And it was super interesting, lots of stuff that had never been done before in action movies going on. There's sort of like this underlying philosophy thing that makes it really fun and interesting to watch if you're a young teenager just thinking about things for the first time in your life. And I believe they had already planned the sequels, so it's not, they didn't just pull them out of thin air. But unfortunately, the way that the sequels worked out is that they take everything that's good about the Matrix and make it just infinitely worse. So everything you thought was cool or interesting or thought-provoking about the original film, they take it and they just say, no, it's not thought-provoking, it's terrible. We're just going to monologue at you for hours about whatever, it's sort of like, I don't really like often going to directors' talks and panels and stuff like that because you see a movie, you have thoughts about it. If it's a good movie, it'll be thought-provoking and interesting. You can go see the director speak, and then the director starts to tell you all the shit that they thought about when they were making it, and you're like, oh no, you're ruining it for me. No, let me come to my own conclusions about this piece of artwork. And The Matrix Revolutions and the third film are basically just the director staring you in the eyes unblinkingly and describing to you why they made every decision they made and what they want you to feel about it. Or think about it, because there's very little feeling in the second or third films. So not only were they unnecessary, but they actually make the first movie worse, because you can't now think of The Matrix, the original film, and not think of the two sequels that were both terrible.
It's tough not to watch an original movie and remember where these characters end up.
Right.
Sometimes. That is definitely one of those where you're like, wow, this Trinity character, I just remembered what happens to her. Oh, Neo is oh god, I just remembered his ending. So, there's so much of that. And, oh look, they resolved the Agent Smith. Oh, guess not. He's right back he's not dead. Okay.
Oh, they're trying to save Zion. Too bad it looks like a rave in a cave.
Yeah. If anything did not deserve saving, it was... yeah.
A sweaty dance party.
Yes, a very unpleasant, sweaty, patchouli-filled dance party.
We do have to take a brief break now for some more advertisement, but we'll be back in a moment.
How much longer do we have? How much more time do we have to...
12 minutes? 13 minutes?
Okay. I have
You have something special?
Well, a couple just occurred to me, and I have one more that's kind of essential that I need to mention is, like, what the hell were they thinking?
I have one when we come back. It'll only take me 30 seconds to mention. It's not even it's not a discussion one. It's just a fun, like, hey, what about this? It's not bad movies either. It's just funny to me. You'll be like, oh yeah, and then you can jump into yours as many as you want.
That music playing across the street at the stadium is.
Oh, is that where it is?
Yeah.
It's an interesting music selection.
Sounds trancy.
Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be nearly enough people there to justify that level of volume.
Yeah.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Like
it's a sparsely.
Oh.
Yeah, it's sparsely populated stands
Well, maybe
and
it only just
really loud music.
Maybe by the time we get out there, it'll be like
Maybe.
overflowing. How much?
What
time
is
we
it? What's going on?
No idea. I thought you knew.
Football game, probably.
5 seconds. And we're back.
Yay, us! Here's a. I won't say these are bad movies. This is a classic sequel reference thing I love mentioning. So these actually are wonderful films, but there's a little thing that's really strange about the sequels, which is the
Star Wars
the Thin Man franchise.
Oh yeah.
So there's a movie. What year was the first Thin Man movie?
Around 35, I think.
Okay, so there's a film called The Thin Man, which is about these two detectives, Nick and Nora.
Nick and Nora Charles. Yep.
That's right. And their lovable dog Asta, who are detectives. They're charming. It's brilliantly written. A very satisfying little movie where they chase down a bad guy who is known as the Thin Man. They've gone looking for the Thin Man. Okay, that's it. That's the plot of the movie. It's very finite. But then they said, well, these characters are beloved. We have to make more stories about them. So they made a sequel called Another Thin Man, meaning we are looking for another suspect who is a thin guy. Okay, that makes sense. But they made more Thin Man movies, and they always used the words Thin Man. And I think by the third movie...
Yeah, ultimately it starts to refer to Nick Charles himself as the Thin Man because that's not, well, William
totally
Powell isn't a
illogical.
fatty, but, it's like that's not the point of what these films were.
Yeah, by the third movie, he is the Thin Man for some reason, and it's like, Thin Man goes on holiday, and Thin Man goes
Another
Hawaiian.
Thin Man, after the Thin Man, the Thin Man goes home, Song of the Thin Man,
Yeah.
Shadow of the Thin Man, and then for some reason the film Penthouse is listed here.
No, that's the magazine. It morphed into being the magazine. His wife was pretty hot. Anyway, I just think it's hilarious that a franchise could literally just subvert its own title and become something completely different. All right, Shane, let's hear your...
Okay, so, here's one with a completely different title to what it was a sequel to, But hey, remember when The Fugitive came out and everyone was like watching Tommy Lee Jones and his crew chase after Harrison Ford, and Harrison Ford was an innocent man on the run. But Tommy Lee Jones and his crew, they were just so engaging and so interesting. You really wanted to see them chase a guilty person.
Which was the premise of the sequel.
Yeah, that's right.
And what was that sequel called, Shane?
Well, they called it U.S. Marshals.
Because that's unmissably connected to the
And
character.
everyone wanted to see those characters chase a guilty man. And this time it's Wesley Snipes. Except it turns out he's another innocent man that they're chasing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, you knew the sequel everyone wanted to see, and you stubbornly refused to make it.
It was U.S. Marshals, always wrong.
Well, the third film in the franchise, Men in Black, he finally gets his man, Will Smith, and he's quite guilty in that, I think.
I also want to mention in the wrong-headed category, occasionally someone decides to make a sequel to an uber cult classic. A cult classic that was lightning's caught in a bottle. And they said, we could do this again. People will appreciate it just as much. They'll rally to this because they just love the first film so much. So there's a couple films I'm thinking of. One in particular, there is a sequel to the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Oh, I was going to say Rocky Horror Picture Show too, but I didn't know where you
No, yeah. It's called Shock Treatment. It's another Richard O'Brien thing. It features Brad and Janet, played by different actors. It features a lot of the same players from Rocky Horror Picture Show. Tim Curry does not show up, but pretty much everyone else is there. And it doesn't work at all. It's a different premise that takes place in the same universe, but it's ill-conceived, the songs aren't catchy, and it's rightfully forgotten. But it does exist. So if you're a true Rocky Horror Picture Show fan, if you're someone who has seen the Rocky Horror Picture Show 100 times and have not even seen Shock Treatment once, correct that.
And then there's the third
Do yourself no favors and correct that.
And go see Shock Treatment.
Also in that category, I'll mention there is such a thing as Heavy Metal 2000.
Oh, good lord.
Sort of a companion piece to Blues Brothers 2000.
Similarly, similar level of quality.
Someone saw the original Heavy Metal animated film, which is an anthology film. So even if you don't like one of the stories, or two of the stories, or three of the stories, wait around for 5 minutes. There's going to be something different in the film. And ultimately, for a lot of people, it scratched a certain adolescent male fantasy itch. And then for the sequel, they said, well, let's just do one big story. And the one big story doesn't work. And you're stuck with it for the entire feature film. So, good job.
That movie was 10 years in development, and I think there were 40 different versions of that story going around at different points.
Yeah, and they absolutely picked the right one.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, if we're talking about, lightning in a bottle, sort of slightly culty films that had horribly unnecessary sequels that detract from the original, and of course, scratching the adolescent fantasy itch. My adolescent fantasy, of course, was really great monster puppets. So of course I'm talking about the film Tremors.
Oh.
I loved when I was growing up, and it is an excellent, excellent little tiny monster movie.
Yep.
Perfect little film.
That's just perfectly done.
And has 8,000 sequels
and
now.
8,000 sequels, none of which
are
even
they're not remotely watchable.
And literally multiple television shows.
Yeah. The first Tremors is just so charming and perfect and beautiful, and this little self-contained, clever, silly little cult movie that I love. And then Tremors 2 just shits all over everything.
Actually, I don't think it does. It just barely matters. That's the thing. If you want to go for shits all over everything...
It doesn't just hit any of the marks that you need.
But get to Tremors 5, 6, 7. That's where you're shitting all over everything.
Yeah, that's true.
That's the point when it becomes a Hellraiser series.
Yeah. It's just a dumping ground for people's first movies. It's
right.
Horrible cast. I think there's a Jamie Kennedy one at some point. All of them, though, in every incarnation, feature Michael Gross, the dad from Family Ties.
Oh, Jamie Kennedy, wasn't he also in the unnecessary sequel to The
Mask?
Yeah.
Or one could argue the Scream movies.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, he's in the original, right?
Yeah, he's in the original. He does make an appearance in the next two as well.
but the Tremor series has sustained Michael Gross's entire life for decades now.
Well, he's waiting for his big Family Ties comeback. The great-grandfather show that they're surely going to make.
Yeah,
this current crop of reboot TV shows.
Yeah, it does stink like there's going to be a reboot eventually.
I find it very hard to imagine a reboot of that show, considering what state Michael J. Fox and Justine Bateman are in now. They're both not camera-ready anymore.
No, but they could replace Justine Bateman with Jason Bateman, and he could play this Teen Wolf 2 character, which would team up with Michael J. Fox's Teen Wolf character, and there's your show.
I'm in. I'm actually really ready to put Kickstarter money down on that right now. I'm fine with that. A couple of just why sequels I'll just mostly mention by title. King Kong Lives. Hey,
God.
When you've got a 50-year-old beloved movie that has the most final ending you've ever seen, the most brilliant thing you can do, let's make a sequel.
Let's bring him back. Let's remake Spartacus, which that film does, and then we'll kill him again because we took such great pains to bring him back.
Like anything, whenever there's a trend of something being talked about at this point in the mid-'80s, it was replacement hearts. They said, what if we gave him a giant mechanical heart that somehow makes him alive again after falling miles to the ground and being crushed?
A giant artificial monkey heart the size of a Volkswagen.
I mean, it's worth seeing for the sheer audacity of it existing at all. And if you've ever wanted to see Linda Hamilton topless, there's your movie. She's got a moment. That's the most memorable thing about it, not the giant monkey heart or the...
Are you sure it wasn't her twin sister doubling for her again?
Maybe. Or yet another chance to see Rick Baker in a monkey suit, because that's really what you're in for. Another, I cannot believe this movie exists, is City Slickers 2, The Legend of Curly's Gold.
Yes.
An entire movie that exists only because Jack Palance won an Oscar for playing a character who dies, and they wanted to follow up his adventures. So they somehow had to resurrect him.
Yeah, well, that was another one, much like the Fugitive sequel, where fans said, hey, wouldn't it be great to see these characters go on another adventure vacation? So they go on the exact same one.
Yeah, initially...
Only minus Bruno Kirby.
I'm fairly sure they should have done something different. Yeah. Yeah, the only person who had any sense in that was Bruno Kirby.
Yeah.
Why would they do something different when people already paid to see the first thing?
Yeah, it's pretty unreal. The original City Slickers, by the way, very, very well-made movie, very well directed, and I'm blanking on it now, but you mentioned a movie earlier, it was by the same director. Tremors. Same director as Tremors, who made about 7 pretty great Hollywood movies in a row over about a decade, and then made one flop, and has been directing television shows ever since. It's like Hollywood immediately forgot. This guy made Tremors and City Slickers a year apart, and like 3 or 4 other pretty great movies.
Was Tremors usually successful? I feel like
no, but it's beloved.
It is beloved.
It was always beloved. Everybody has a soft spot for it. I mean,
yeah, I remember even at the time it was being referred to as the first great horror movie of the 1990s, and it turned out it was actually the last great horror film of the 1980s, because
yes.
1990s horror did not look like that at all. This was the 80s latex schlocky monster horror.
Monster
Yeah, they had an
horror
awful
that I
lot of
love
fun.
so much.
Yeah, well, I guess on that note, we're coming to the end of
We are coming, indeed, to the sad close of our show this week.
Oh, but Hollywood won't end. They'll come up with more and more unnecessary sequels.
Forever and ever and ever, into infinity and beyond.
I can't wait to see Hereditary 2, and...
We barely even mentioned the Star Wars prequels this whole episode. So.
Yeah, but people...
Oh, thank God.
We tried to get the stuff people are a little less familiar with, you know? I mean, I think everyone...
There's so many other films to be angry about.
Yeah. I mean, Han Solo 2 ought to be good. We'll see. We'll reach the heights of the first one.
Alright, we gotta go. We are out of time. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Check us out on the medias. Bye.
I understand when you cut us off. When you cut yourself off.
Hey. Hi. How's it going? Fine. How are you?